Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever, wherever you are watching this. My name is Marcus Octavius, and I'm here with a friend, obviously. Welcome to part 3 of the Shore Leave Weekend, African versus, excuse me, Arabic drums. I want to thank everybody who have participated thus far. I really can't get this done without you guys. All the inspiration you give me and things therein. Um, Part one is up on the Facebook page, which is Tribal and such, which has a lot of roots corresponding to some of the stuff I'm gonna glance over today. Part two, Shore Leave After Dark, which was a very somewhat daunting task to put together. I'm not gonna lie. Sort of blending, when you try to blend, Ibiza and Mara Luna, you get an odd combination of dance music. But nonetheless, I was able to do it. Excuse me. And this time around, we're gonna glance over something that it's a personal preference of mine. I'm not gonna lie. Um, when I submitted a vote a few months back as to what everybody wanted to hear from, this was the lowest end on the totem pole. But for me personally, as a performer, it's something that a lot of people have enjoyed by proxy, and that's my combination of African drums and Arabic drums into something that's a weird collage that should not work, but for a wacko like me, it does. So, what I've done is I've decided to make 5 particular notes that I think are worth noting. The first set is for, of course, the djembe, which is what you see here. This is a more modern model, a Leonard Mobley Remo model signature series. Big drum, obviously. It's got a lot of pounds. It's got a lot of weight to it. But the djembe is one of those drums that everybody has heard, everybody has seen, and for some people they just don't realize it. And like I said, I've got 5 notes here that I'd like to go over, and I'm going to jump into them right now. Number 1, originally, according to most researchers, the djembe drum was discovered, and I use that in quotes, by a Mandekan caste of blacksmiths known as the Numu. That's Numu. And apparently they were manufacturing this drum in some way, shape, or form. I'm not sure if they used any sort of ceramics. I know most of them are made out of wood. As a matter of fact, if you will pardon me, here is what a more traditional model would look like. As obviously you can see, the ropes and everything are tying the head down. Now this is a more natural drum with wood. It's made out of wood, obviously, and the head is a natural head. Now, at the time I had purchased this, I was not sure what the head is, other than it being a natural animal. And the person that I got it from couldn't confirm it for me either. So there you go. It was originally discovered, number 2, it was originally discovered in the Mali Empire in West Africa, which comprised parts of Guyana, Mali, Burkina Faso, Ivory Coast, Gambia, and Senegal. Now, for a lot of people, Western Africa is very much that region that's sub-Saharan, but west towards the Atlantic Ocean, obviously. But sometimes you got to explain things to people. I'm sure some of you understand. But that's a pretty big region to cover. And we're talking 1st century AD is when it was alleged to have first been discovered by Western eyes. And, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, I suppose. Number 3, Fodeba Keita is a name that is probably not well known to a lot of people, but it was a Darbuk, a djembe Fola, djembe master, who started, the La Belle Africains, which is Guyana's and Africa's first national dance company. And this was actually in the 50s, I believe it is, the 50s or 60s. And it was started by this gentleman, adopted by I believe it was the Mali, the actual country Mali, president, and the president sponsored the tour of this group, and they apparently went international, even apparently having connections to Eastern Europe at the time, back when it was Soviet controlled. Number 4, for Western sounds, you can trace back the djembe and actually African sounds in and of themselves to a number of Western audiences. For those of you who are older, you know of Paul Simon and his collaboration with Ladysmith Black Mambazo, who have been featured on the playlist before. Maynard Keyes of Tool has incorporated a number of African sounds and a djembe into a number of his music. And the performance troupe, the European performance troupe Cirque du Soleil, have incorporated drums of this nature into a lot of their acts. Number 5, and this is one that I found very surprising, and in a way it's a sort of a judgment on how we perceive certain people. In the late 90s, a gentleman by the name of, now I'm going to try to get this right, Mamoudou Kandé, and I don't know if he's any relation to Bolakala Kandé, who was featured on the Tribal and Such play from Friday, started looking into incorporating women players. Now, apparently this was something that traditionally the man did, and a lot of the women were dancers, tribal dancers, and I'm sure some of you have seen troops of that nature performing. Excuse me. And in fact, he put together the first all-female group in 2004. On top of all that, French drummer Annie Yolande Diarra has become a djembe fola, as well as Marinette Marina Keita, some of these names, ladies and gentlemen, won the hand drum-off in San Diego, the first annual hand drum-off, and became the first woman to do so. So for a woman to just show up to the competition and win the first annual, that's a lot of history being made there in San Diego. So now we're going to move on. And just point of reference before we do move on, djembes and African drums not only come, not only come in different shapes and sizes, they are also made out of different sort of material. Now this is also a Remo, Remo being one of the biggest manufacturers of percussive instruments in the world. And this is actually what they call a kid's djembe. Now I have actually had this thing since 1999, and it still sounds great, ladies and gentlemen. When it's built to last. Of course, if you treat it well, it'll last you a long time as well. So let's move on to the goblet drum, as they call it. Now, some people are saying automatically, that's not a goblet drum. Well, let me explain. A goblet drum is actually a very generic, sort of across-the-board name for a drum usually found in Egypt, North Africa, parts of the Middle East, and even some regions that, dock along sort of Indian borders. In fact, it has a number of different names, including Doumbek, Tabla, Darbuka, Tarabaki, and Doumbeg. And I'm hoping I'm pronouncing those right. It has very Arabic origins. A lot of people seem to believe that Egypt is the home base for this particular kind of drum. It's based on the word darabara, which is Egyptian Arabic for to strike. Number 3, the first known use was in a play called Les Toyes by Hector Belozes in 1856 to 1858. He called for a tarabuka. Now, this is, of course, a rough translation. We're talking about Arabic to some sort of Western dialect. I believe it was either French or German, depending on who you ask. And it was used in the Dance of the Nubian Slaves. Take for that what you will, ladies and gentlemen. And here is a more traditional looking model. And as you can see, it's more natural headed. It has the ties around it and the tassels. Number 4, a lot of Western audiences have been exposed to the sounds of the Arabic drum, the goblet drum. Some of the more prolific drummers, and God rest his soul, he passed away, I think, either this year or last year, Hosam Ramzi, who was famous for performing with Led Zeppelin, or at least a form of Led Zeppelin. He was on tour with them and performed in the song Four Sticks with the Page and Plant Unleaded tour. Carmine Guida, who is a great session musician as well as I would consider him a master performer of this kind of drum. And also, you can hear the sound of Western influences, of Eastern influences in Western music. U2 famously did this in their song Mysterious Ways. It's even bled into hip-hop music. Jay-Z's Big Pimpin' is actually a sample of a Hosam Ramzi song, which was a cover of a Abdel Halim Hafez song called Kasara Kasara. Number 5, like I mentioned before, there are a number of variations. There's, of course, the Egyptian model. There's also a Turkish, Moroccan, Persian, and Cambodian version called a Skor-Day, which is a very oddly shaped drum, but it's very similar to this. It's another goblet-shaped type model. Now, what I'd like to get into right now is sharing with you some other information that I have found out about drums and things of that nature. In fact, one of the things that people find very surprising is that the congas and bongas that we use in Latin music actually have an African origin to them. They're actually African congas and African bongas that have been created. Now, as we all know, there's the famous slave trade, the triangle trade. Excuse me. What African slaves did when they landed in the Caribbean and parts south is that they brought the sound of the drum with them. But of course, we're talking about somewhat different trees, so there's somewhat different manufacturing therein, and so you get the congas and bongas that we have today. Now, one particular interesting note, and this will be the last note that I end on, is this particular bad boy. Now, depending on where you go in the ancient world, it has a different name and is played differently. Now, this is what we call a frame drum. Again, Remo, great manufacturer, highly recommend them. This particular one is more of an African style, but if you ever have heard Celtic music, I think Dropkick Murphys famously play them. It's called a baldron. And what I've come to find out is that we can actually trace this back to Roman times. As you well know, the Romans conquered many parts of the world, North Africa, parts of the Middle East. Well, they also had outposts in the British Isles, Britannia famously, Roman Britannia. They had brought the sound of this up there. And the Celtic tribes, the Scottish and the Irish, took to it and created their own version, from what I understand. Now, of course, this information is always subject to change. We were always finding out information about it all the time. But really, ladies and gentlemen, what the sums up is that no matter where you go or what you do, a drum almost always sounds the same, and a drum sounds excellent. I would like to personally thank everybody who participated in the Shore Leave weekend. I know I picked a very odd weekend to do it, but that's kind of the reason I did it. This was also a subject that I knew would appeal to a number of different people. And I also want to thank those of you who have supported me thus far. This has been a labor of love. I've had a lot of things to figure out on the fly and information to gather in a very short amount of time in order to do not only the playlist, but also these lessons and lectures that I give. So thank you very much for your support. Thank you very much for this Shore Leave weekend. I'm looking at possibly doing another one October, November, December. The the Facebook page for the live class is coming. It will be on Zoom, I believe it is, and the information for that will be coming very soon. Hopefully this week coming. Sometime after Labor Day Monday. Hopefully that Friday. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Labor Day weekend, and goodbye.